April 15th is less than 3 months away. And I thought, as a gift to you, to kind of remind you of what we can expect around April 15th, I took a photograph on April 15th, 2010, when I was researching the remnants of the Central Canal west of Anderson. And I came upon what I thought was a beautiful sight, and I photographed it. And so it's my present to you tonight to let you know that this is just around the corner. What do you think? Tonight's presentation is part of that series, If the River Could Talk. And I've selected chapters 20 and 21, which are two chapters, both titled A River of Fun. I made this choice for tonight because it was a lot of fun for me putting it together, and I thought you would enjoy it from that standpoint. It's something to just sit back and relax. Some things you'll recognize, but I'll bet you there'll be some things that you won't recognize in the River of Fun. If the river could talk, the many places it would mention where fun, sport, and recreation have been enjoyed along the course through Madison County going back many generations. There once was a place along the river known as the Old Swimming Hole. Over the years, there have been many swimming holes in the White River, but this one was probably the most popular, at least during the 19th century. It was located where the first bridge over the river was built behind today's Harder House. That bridge was washed away in the flood of January 1847, leaving only the pier on the river's left bank. For at least a half a century, history records that there was scarcely a boy in Anderson who had not plunged into the river's clear and beautiful waters from that old pier. That pier would have been about where this overlook is behind the Harder House. This is the place where the river was first bridged in 1844. As I told you, it washed away in a January thaw in January of 47. A little history for you on the builders. They were brothers by the name of Rogers. They were from the Pendleton area. They were nephews of the very first settler in Madison County, John Rogers. And they were builders of barns, houses, whatever, and they built this bridge. The county paid them $600. Just across the river is today's athletic park. Its history goes back to the year 1900 when the Anderson Fair Association opened a harness racing track. Many of the area's finest horses and drivers competed there during the summer and fall for years, with the heaviest concentration occurring during the annual Anderson Free Fair. The arrow points to the racetrack in a 1901 atlas of the area and a Google Earth shot of that area today. This is one of my favorite photographs. Little research tells me that the track didn't officially open until the fall of 1900, but on July 4th, 1900, they had a special event, and this is it. And look at that packed grandstand. 2,600 was the estimate of the crowd size, and from the looks of it, I don't think 2601 would have fit. But notice in the foreground, all horse and buggy. Notice the picket fence that separated the racetrack from the crowd. Neat photograph. Another photograph of the Anderson Free Fair years later. And the original grandstand that was there. This grandstand, or that was there when I was a kid. Great photograph. 1936 is what we estimate is the free fair. Look at the Ferris wheel in the background. Question to you. Does anybody know the first year that Anderson held a free fair? 1922. 1922. This is a 1960 photograph showing Heck Kirk. Curly Lambert was the name of the horse.
We've got that blanket here.
And we have that blanket here. Yes, we do. Under Anderson Mayor Frank Foster in 1910-1913, the city acquired the area and renamed it Foster Park during a dedication ceremony July 4th, 1913. The park was renamed Athletic Park 2 years later, 1915. That's Frank Foster. Beginning in December of 1915, the north half of the racetrack was flooded, providing 3 acres for ice skating. They brought in pumps and hoses and pumped from the river and flooded the north half of the racetrack. This area right here. And fortunately, we've got some photographs of that.
City Park.
Neat.
Outfit.
And the last one. The 21.1 acre park added an above ground 320,000 gallon swimming pool in 1925, which operated until 2007, longer than any other public pool in the state of Indiana. And you know that was not purchased with the intention of placing it there. It was ordered as a result of Anderson's annexation of North Anderson in 1923. And the city thought it would be a nice idea as a welcoming gift to North Anderson to order and place a pool in Shadyside Park. Well, the people that live in North Anderson weren't so thrilled about that. So much so that they remonstrated to the state legislature. And they won. And Anderson was stuck with a pool that was on order and no place to put it. That's how it ended up there. If you read the accounts in the newspaper of the North Anderson citizens, the reason why they didn't want the pool up there because it would draw the Anderson expletives to their area, and they didn't want that. Mm-hmm. That's the pool today. In the 1890s, and across 8th Street, a short distance to the east from where the pool would eventually be located, was the property of the Anderson Baseball Association. Here, baseball skills were honed by a few local boys who later played Major League Baseball. Chauncey Burr Woe Bill Fisher, now I don't know what the Woe Bill was all about. He was a pitcher for the Cleveland Spiders, the Cincinnati Reds, the Brooklyn Bridegrooms, the Chicago White Sox, the New York Giants, the St. Louis Cardinals, and he pitched from 1893 to 1901. He's buried in Maplewood Cemetery. Charlie Nepper was a pitcher for the Cleveland Spiders, 1899. Thomas Chalmers, the brother of Chauncey, was a pitcher with the Boston Beaneaters in 1904. The Cleveland Spiders are today the Cleveland Indians. The Brooklyn Bridegrooms are now the Los Angeles Dodgers. And we talked about the Cleveland Spiders. The Boston Beaneaters,
Braves?
Atlanta Braves. They are the Atlanta Braves. And Philip Bernard Peaches O'Neill. Look at that spelling there, Terry.
I know, right?
He was a catcher in 1904 with the Cincinnati Reds. All of those boys, through my research, I've determined that they honed their skills at that park. That park was located where you see the arrow. Here's Athletic Park, here's the pool, here would be the Eisenhower Bridge, 8th Street, and this area right here today would be where Mustin Builders are located, okay? So this area here, and you can see on an old Sanborn insurance map that I found for the area, the designation baseball park. Unfortunately, it does not give me a full-on view of how big it was, but research tells me that it encompassed an area about like this. And some recent research that I've come across said that it extended all the way to the river. Well, you would think that means this way. But as Bill Knapp and I know, this was the home of the Philadelphia Glass Company, and so the extension to the river must have been to the south, because it was in this area where the boys found all of those glass bottles when they were excavating the pipe, the sewer pipe that went through there. A walking suspension bridge erected in 1892 spanned the river, making an easy access to the baseball field from downtown Anderson. If the river could talk, it would tell how the boys and young men took great delight in making the bridge swing and sway just to hear the screams of the young ladies when they returned to town after an evening game. And the description I have found is that on this bridge, the boys would get out here in the center span and then begin to do this. And that thing would go, and then they would do this, and that thing would sway. And to great delight, they listened to the ladies' screams. Hanging on these support posts were lanterns that would guide them back and forth across the river at night, which tells me they had night baseball in the 1890s. They had lights. Notice the sign here, Furniture, Munchoff, Undertaker. That's a 1890 days billboard. And Mr. Munchoff was the undertaker. His business was downtown, but he also, which was common practice in those days, undertakers were also furniture makers. Because when you weren't undertaking, you had your skills that you built coffins with, so you could build furniture. So it was a common thing for undertakers to also be furniture makers. This bridge is today, if it were there today, about where the Eisenhower Bridge is, about that same location. Upriver from downtown Anderson is the ancient site of earthworks constructed centuries ago by prehistoric Native Americans known as the Mound Builders. If the river could talk, it would tell of a family called Brandenburg who arrived at the mound site in the 1820s. Frederick Brandenburg Jr. built a two-story house within sight of the Great Mound in 1840. For the next 57 years, Frederick and his descendants kept watch over the mounds, occasionally chasing away an unwelcome visitor who sought to tread upon the delicate earthworks. They were the first preservationists. They saw the value of those mounds and keeping people off of them, because any earthwork that's walked upon breaks down and wears down. However, in 1897, a big change was about to take place at the ancient ceremonial site. That's Mr. Brandenburg's home. In those days, these trees were not there, and he could keep an eye on the mounds from that second-story window. A new kind of visitor, one seeking amusement, began to arrive in the person of patrons to the new Mounds Amusement Park. If the river could talk, it would tell of the thousands of people it witnessed enjoying the park during its 31 years of existence. From high up on top of the 75-foot river bluff could be heard the joyful sounds of miniature trains, passengers circling the Great Mound, and in later years winding its way through the park. And we have this wonderful photograph that's actually property of the Mounds Park, but we've got it here, showing you that train that went around the Great Mound and the ladies up here on the Great Mound. I suppose if Frederick Brandenburg were still around, he'd shoo them off too. The thing that is amusing to me, ladies, about this is obviously a summertime picture, but look how the ladies are dressed. Those sounds were often mixed with the shrill sounds of screaming adults and children as they experienced the thrill of riding the park's roller coaster, known as Leap the Dips. Especially when the wooden coaster's cars would fly, emphasis fly, around the sharp curve that hugged the river bluff, providing the rider with the notion that this trip to the brink of that high precipice would certainly be their last. When I was doing my research for the Mounds Amusement Park, I spent days out at the park going through all of their archival records and so forth. Had to blow a lot of dust off of a lot of books to get everything. But fortunately, in a lot of those books were interviews conducted years ago by people who at one time visited and were patrons of the park. And so I got this information from them. And this word fly appears, fly and raced appears many times in the description of the roller coaster as it made its way around the park, or made its way around the structure. Here is the Leap the Dips. And one of the great photographs that we have, 1911, shows the one half of that figure 8. And it was in this area where you are 40 feet above the ground, and then when you get to the ground, you're another 75 feet to the river. So from here, you are what, 115 feet? And that was what people feared most. Just a quick story, I interviewed a lady who remembered riding on that coaster. She called me, she said, come out, and I will tell you my story. I spent 2 Saturday afternoons with her. She was at Bethany Point. Hilda Anderson was her name. She was married to attorney Harold Anderson. And I asked her about her remembrances of the park, and she told me all kinds of various things, and then I saved it for Leap the Dips. I said, well, Hilda, did you ever ride that coaster? Oh, yes, Mr. Jackson. I did ride that coaster. I said, what was it like? She said, it was the scariest thing I was ever on in my life. It was also the fastest thing I was ever on in my life. And I said, really, Hilda? I said, well, how fast did it go? I don't know, but she says, my heart would end up in my... scared me to death. I said, well, then you probably only rode it once, didn't you? Oh, heavens no, I rode it a lot of times. I found out that in Altoona, Pennsylvania, today, you can go to Lakemont Park in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and there is a twin to this coaster. A twin built by the same man, Edward Joy Morris. Ours was built in 1908, theirs was built in 1902. It's a twin. So I called the park and I asked I asked for the engineer of the maintenance area there in the park, and she put me through to him, and I introduced myself and I said, I'm researching the Leap the Dips, and I said, I need some information about it. Okay, what do you need? And I told him what I wanted. He gave me all of his facts and figures, and then the key question. I said, how fast does your coaster go? Remembering all of these raced and fly and fastest thing I was ever on. I said, how fast does your coaster go? He said, top speed is 10 miles an hour. A very popular attraction provided yet another sound that resounded over the river below. Known as the Pavilion, it was a 2-story wooden structure where food and drinks were served on the first floor. However, it was from the 2nd-story dance floor that music wafted out through the open windows, reaching across the park grounds down to the river that was well remembered by park goers. This is repeated in all those interviews, how much people enjoyed just sitting in the park and listening to the music as it wafted out through the park. That's the Pavilion. Got several pictures of it here. This back here is the bluff. It's set right on the bluff, right above the river. And that's a postcard of it. Incidentally, these folks here are sitting on wooden benches that are nailed to the trees, and that was how people could rest as they walked through the park, sitting on benches that were nailed to the trees. While the river could only hear the sounds coming from above, it was witness to the pleasure experienced by those who ventured to the river to partake of a canoe ride. While waiting their turn, thirsty patrons could drink to their satisfaction from the water provided by an artesian well located nearby. I love this picture. It's obviously a hot day. The ladies, who do not look really happy, have made paper hats to cover their heads. And if you look at how wet it is around the artesian well, it obviously was well used. A man and a young girl, presumably a father and daughter, they're drinking from tin cups that were chained. Chained. You can see the hooks that chained them. Now that wouldn't happen today, would it? Regardless of rainfall amounts, a pleasurable canoe excursion was assured throughout the summer season by a man-made stone dam constructed near the point where the trail brought visitors down to the river from the amusement area above. From the dock, patrons were free to explore the river however they wished. The only rule was that they could not go beyond the park's boundary, which in the case of the river was identified as the Pest House Bridge, crossing at East 10th. Yes, we had a pest house in Madison County out there. That freedom to explore did not include the occasional tip-over, providing the unsuspecting canoeist with an unwelcome dip in the river. And I found numerous interviews where the ladies had come in their fine dresses to enjoy the park and ended up in a river. Flat-bottom boats were eventually added to circumvent the problem. This is a photograph showing you that rock dam. Here's some fishermen below it. Normally the water level in here, as it is today, is about 2 feet, but the rock dam raised that water level to about 4 feet. The bridge abutment you see here is what used to be East 10th Street, where it crossed White River and made its way over past the Poor Farm and into Chesterfield. And the pest house set up here. And this would have been the limit for a canoe. They had to turn around and come back. And so many times I found in the information that they were charged by the hour to rent the canoe. And if the time was running out and they weren't going to be able to get back, and therefore they'd have to incur a second hour charge, they'd just beach the boat and leave. Another rule that I found, if you see this picture postcard, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, and I think a 5th person. The rule was 3, no more than 3. And you see a paddle wheel on a pontoon with a canopy over it. Here's those tin cups I was telling you about. And you see the boat ramp. This was where you rented the canoe. Funny story. A good friend to me and a good friend to this historical society was a lady by the name of Martha Carmichael. How many remember Martha Carmichael? She was great. She came to me on several occasions and brought me photographs that she thought I could use. And she brought me this one. And I asked her about it. And she said, well, this is at Mounds Park. That's my dad. His name was Radeball. And I said to her, I said, about when was that taken? And she said, I think about 1915. And then I asked the obvious question, is that your mom? Heavens no, I don't know who that is. Joseph Radeball. A short distance west of Mounds Amusement Park was a rather unique place. Now listen to this. How many of you worked at Delco Remy? Great. It was known as the Remy Country Club for Workers. You ever hear of it? Well, Bill has, because I've told him the story. Acquired by the manager of Remy Electric, Mr. F.L. Atwood, on May 2nd, 1917, its purpose was to provide company workers a place for their families to enjoy a country club atmosphere, one that had been denied at other clubs. And the story there is, and I don't say this to offend anyone, but in those days, Anderson Country Club would not accept members who were not of a certain social status. And the workers at Remy were not of that status. That's specifically spelled out in the information that I found on it. So, to provide them a country club, Mr. Atwood acquired some ground and he built one. Well, where was it? It occupied 8 acres. This is Rangeline Road. This is Mounds Road. This is the Madison County Juvenile Detention Center, formerly the Brandenburg Orphans Home. And this 8 acres of ground was where the Remy Country Club for Workers was located. And there's a brochure that we have of it, showing some of the buildings that you could come out and stay in overnight if you chose to. They had a tennis court. They had the steps led down to the river area where there was picnic area, and I'll show you some more of that in just a moment. At the center of the 8-acre site was a clubhouse that overlooked the river, containing a large living room, dining room, and kitchen, waiting room, and a very large area verandas on all sides. Portable cottages, which were lighted and well ventilated and equipped with hot and cold water, were reserved for the company officials. The grounds were laid out for amusements and sports with amenities like tennis, croquet, quoits, clock golf, and other games. Any questions about anything that you see up there? I'm prepared. Quoit. All right, those are the two I prepared, Bill. Quoits is a game kind of like horseshoes. Only instead of a horseshoe, you had a ring. And you tossed the ring and tried to land on a stake or close to it. Probably similar rules of horseshoes. That was quoits. Now, clock golf, that threw me. You know what that was? You could purchase the Roman numerals for a clock. And you could lay them out in what was called a 30-foot diameter circle. And then there was a portable hole that you placed anywhere you chose in the center of that circle. And then if you wanted to add shrubbery or rocks or whatever, you could. And then the game was played this way. You started at 12 and you putted. And you counted the number of putts till you got to the first hole. Took the ball out, went back to the number 1 and did the same thing. Went over, kind of like miniature golf, right? And that's the clubhouse. Now we got really lucky. 4 different photographs came to us by 4 different donors at 4 different times. And when the first one came, it was this one. And I looked at that for the longest time and thought, where on earth is that and who is it and what's going on? There was no clues. I'd almost thought it was behind the 40 and 8. Almost. But then this one showed up. And look at the signage. Remy Service Department, Pig Roast, October 23rd, 1920. And there's the river. And then I put it together. This was the area down along the river where the Remy workers could gather for picnics. And I got 2 more of them. Now the guy holding this flag needs a little flag etiquette, Emily. And at first I wondered, was the picture backwards? But no, these fields of blue on these flags are correct. So he's just upside down and backwards on that, isn't he? But you can see it's a group of folks down there to have a picnic. Here would be where the cooks were, and that's the river in the background. Now, where are we? Where are we? Right across the river is where the old junkyard on Rangeline Road was. You with me? Okay. And in fact, I thought, I've got to get into this. That's on my bucket list, Jim. I got to get in here and see this place. But first of all, I want to know what I was up against. So I went over here, and this has all been cleared out, and I can see this side of the river now. Last picture, another gathering. But see these weeds? They're over my head. There's no way I can get in there when the foliage is up. The country club existed until 1924 when Calvin A. Brandenburg Orphans Home opened there in September. And you all remember that. Large groves of trees played a huge role in the enjoyment of people being riverside. The first community gathering site was a place called Harriman's Grove, whose earliest mention I found in May of 1860. Harriman's Grove was named for Dr. Leonard Harriman, who came to Madison County in the 1840s, and he practiced in Alexandria to begin with. Subsequently, he acquired property near the southwest corner of Andersontown limits on the bluff that today forms a strip of land that lies between White River and Cincinnati Avenue, immediately southeast of Wheeler Avenue. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. Cincinnati Avenue, the river, and Wheeler. Believe it or not, in the 1860s, that was the address to have in Anderson. That was the address to have. I'm pointing, my arrow points to the area where the old Harriman's Grove was located. The Grove answered for a town park and was the site of many speeches, Sunday school outings, Masonic celebrations, 4th of July activities, and other public meetings. And one thing I found that was most interesting, Gerald Jones, was in the late summer of 1861, the 8th Indiana Regiment, at that time was a 3-month regiment, had gone off to war, Civil War, had served its 3 months, and had come back to Anderson, and they were feted by the ladies of Anderson at Harriman's Grove, 1861. Boating, fishing, and dancing were quite popular, as well as swimming at the Nolan Swimming Hole, located in the river behind the property of Stephen Nolan. Stephen Nolan's home was just immediately upriver on the same side from Harriman's Grove. Several substantial homes of former prominent Anderson citizens were erected there before the discovery of natural gas in 1887. Today, the area is bounded roughly by Prospect Street to Wheeler Avenue and Cincinnati Avenue to the river. And there it is. That's Harriman's Grove today. The property owner there has built some steps down here, and I imagine that is a beautiful place for a gathering and so forth for the family. But that is Harriman's Grove. On the opposite bank and a short distance downriver was Ruddle's Grove. Married in Anderson on December the 23rd, 1856, Milton Ruddle and his wife Ellen owned a large farm just northeast of Anderson's downtown. After raising their children, the couple built a house in 1891 on the high ground overlooking the city and adjacent area eventually called Park Place. Here's Harriman's Grove, and we just travel up the river past Athletic Park, and here's Ruddle's Grove. Harriman is on the left bank, Ruddle is on the right bank of the river. The Ruddles retained almost 12 acres of the most picturesque portion of the property for their home. On the heights immediately west of that home was an area called Ruddle's Grove. It was located roughly between today's High Street and Grand Avenue and Alexandria Pike and Park Avenue, and was known by everyone as one of the handsomest spots in our county. The annual Old Settlers meeting was held there in its later stages, as well as other gatherings. I find Old Settlers meetings there in the teens and early 20s. This shows you the area. This is High Street. This is Grand Avenue, the Big Bend in the river, and this whole area now, of course, is developed, but this was Ruddle's Grove, Ruddle Street in Park Place, named for the family. There's a Google Earth shot of it. And I took this picture summer before last, actually went up on the property and faced back out to show you what a nice shady area that would be. These trees are witness trees. They're witness trees. And that's two pictures that we have of what Old Settlers meetings look like. Both of them were in Alexandria. I wonder if this is not a marriage.
Yeah.
The way they're dressed, I don't know. And the cabin in the background. And I have a second Old Settlers meeting photograph, also in Alexandria. It's a tradition that goes back to the 1850s, where the settlers originally got together on a Sunday afternoon, where they wouldn't work, they would picnic, and they would play the fiddle and dance, and they would visit, and the children would play with each other. And it was a socializing thing. And these were held, they were annual, and then they had them more often as people enjoyed them. They were going on all over the state, and the Peru County, or Peru, Indiana, is it LaPorte County? Miami County. They still celebrate an Old Settlers Day. If the river could talk, it would tell of a July 4th, 1895 citywide celebration that concluded that evening when the townsfolk gathered in Ruddles Grove and on the opposite side of the river to witness a grand display of fireworks. This is some pictures taken downtown July 4th, 1895 for the parade, and this gentleman right here in the bowler is Union General Lew Wallace, the author of Ben-Hur. He was the honored guest that day. And this next photograph, I love it. If you delve into it, you will find that the streetcar sold 20,000 fares that day to take people from the downtown out to the Anderson Driving Park, which today would be where Hunter Widener used to be, Myers Auto World. There was a racetrack out there. And there was a Civil War sham battle conducted that day, and 23,000 attended. 20,000 of them rode the cars, and 3,000 of them walked the distance out there. You can see the bunting, how the windows are decorated for 4th of July. Anderson, 1895. This area right here, you'll recognize the Truman Bridge, right? And Grand Avenue, and the bend in the river, and this is the low area in the river. Man for Man is right down here. This was called Hazlitt Commons, after a man by the name of James Hazlitt, who later was mayor of Anderson. And this is where they shot off the fireworks. And the people sat on the bluffs here of Ruddles Grove and enjoyed the fireworks. That's what people did in 1895. What a great spectacle it must have been if only the river could talk. Some scenes of the river in the area that I've just described. I call your attention to a gentleman, and he's got a bucket. And I was taking the picture, and I saw him, and I said, "How's the fishing?" "Great," he says. I said, "What are you catching?" He reached in that bucket, and he pulled up a stringer. I said, "What are they?" He says, "They're sunfish. Lots of sunfish in the river right here." Well, that made me think of a photograph that I've got that's kind of sentimental to me. I can't look at that picture and not get a little weepy. When my brother was 15 years old, I was 2, but I've seen pictures of him. That's not him, but that boy looks just like him, and my brother had a shirt just like that. The building in the background is the water plant. This is Edgewater Park, and the water treatment plant was right across the river. At one time in Anderson's history, city parks dominated both sides of the river for several blocks from near 7th Street to beyond 10th Street. Most likely a replacement for Harriman's Grove was McCullough Park. Located on the left bank, the first mention of it is in 1887 when the great gas well Vesuvius was present there. You see McCullough Park here. Again, this is a 1901 map of the city of Anderson, and you see the McCullough Park designation. The name was changed to Riverside Park at some point in time and continued to be a favorite site for picnicking well into the 20th century. In 1894, however, and sandwiched between those names, McCullough and Riverside, the area was known as Inwood Park. It was the site of a tragedy in August of that year. Frank Stutzky operated a beer garden at the park, and in order to draw patrons to his establishment, he held a balloon ascension one afternoon. Now today, I don't know how many of us would go and watch a balloon go up. Balloon ascensions always drew large crowds of spectators as they were seen as daredevil experiences. The aeronaut, Miss Tilly Seaburn, a 17-year-old from Richmond, Indiana, who was a novice in balloon ascension. This photograph is from the Mounds Park collection, and I included it because it is a balloon ascension. But the man in the balloon is Frank Crawford, and it's 1910, and he is a resident of Anderson, Indiana. And he took his balloon to Mounds Park and gathered a large crowd, and he and his assistant went up in the balloon, and the camera captured the moment when Frank, in his parachute, left the gondola. Frank made it to the ground fine. I have no idea what happened to the assistant in the gondola. When all was ready, the rope was cut and the giant balloon lifted towards the heavens, spurred on by the shouts of several hundred spectators. When it reached a height of about 800 feet, the balloon burst, allowing the heated air to escape. Horrified onlookers watched what was left of the balloon and its passenger descend with great speed, landing Tilly with terrific force near the riverbank at the east end of the 10th Street Bridge. Death was instantaneous. If the river could talk, it would tell of a very sad day when her family arrived at Stutzky's beer garden to take their daughter home for burial. And the place where she landed, you may recognize the pier here for the East 10th Street Bridge. She would have landed, based upon the newspaper description, in this area right here. Well, let's do something a little happier. 34 years later, the area where Miss Seaburn met her unfortunate demise would become the city's last park. Development along this stretch of the river, known as Edgewater Park, it opened in 1928. While many enjoyed the park for its scenic beauty and riverside experiences, some were drawn to the water sports that were a unique feature of Edgewater Park. The arrows show you the outline of Edgewater Park. Across the river and a short distance downstream was located Anderson's first waterworks plant, erected in 1886. With the city's growing population brought about by the discovery of natural gas in 1887, a new and larger facility was built on the same site in 1893, and in 1904 a filtration plant was added. A substantial concrete dam was erected at the waterworks site to create a pool of water from which the city obtained its water supply. Yes, we originally got our water from the river. While serving a functional need, the dam also had an unplanned recreational benefit. That's the dam. I'm sure most of you in this room remember that dam. I was never that venturesome, but I know of boys my age that would walk across that, and I even know a few that rode their bicycle across that thing. Now that was as moss covered as you can get. The dam created a pool of water deep enough to allow boating and water skiing upstream, which added to the enjoyment of the Edgewater Park visitors, one they enjoyed for many years. You can see this area that's dammed up by the dam, Edgewater Park being on the left, here's the waterworks on the right. And today in Edgewater Park is an old boat ramp. At one time, White River abounded with a variety of bass and other fish. So plentiful were the fish that it was once stated that in an hour's labor with a spear, it was not uncommon to supply a dozen families with an excellent meal. And painted on the side of one of the bridge abutments for the 10th Street Bridge is a painting here showing Native Americans spearfishing in the river. One of the favorite fishing sites was from the gates at the head of the mill race that led to Moss Island Mill. Now I learned something here. from the gates at the head of the mill race that led to the Moss Island Mill. Remember that. The island was a favorite place for picnicking and fishing parties. It was not uncommon sight during summer to see 40 to 50 fishermen perched upon the old water gates like turtles on a log, fishing from morning to night. That was the description I found of that, like turtles on a log. So guys, if you're fishermen, watch out if there's somebody around you with a pencil and paper, you may be being written about. This is a photograph that we have of a lady sitting on the old dam at Moss Island. It was the ford. It's how you got back and forth across the river at that point. And here you see it here. Now, to explain to you, the dam was there not only to outline the ford, because you can see the ford took a dog leg. And if you weren't familiar with the river, you'd end up in the deep part. So you better stay where the dam was. The entrance to the mill race was over here. This is Moss Island, and the entrance to here. To back up for you, over here is the bridge that crosses the river at Moss Island. It's out of the picture. Apparently, when Mr. Mullinex built that mill in 1836, and a man by the name of Sorensen dug the mill race, a 20-foot wide mill race, 20 feet wide, hand dug it from the headwater down to the mill. Mr. Mullinex must have put in some gates, hence the description, that he could open and close when he wanted water to operate his mill. Well, I have a picture. That is from underneath the Moss Island Mill. And you can see the mill race coming in, and here the gates that open and close that allow the water then to pass through and fall down on the old American turbines and whirl them and drive the machinery that was hooked to those turbines on the upper floors. When they didn't want to operate the machinery, they merely would close these gates, and the water then would flow over a dam. And many of you have seen those pictures of Moss Island Mill with a dam, a waterfall beside it. So some point in time, it tells me that the gates were no longer useful at the head of the mill race, and instead they allowed the water to enter the mill here at this point. That was a revelation for me. I get excited over some pretty simple things. Not to be left out were the wintertime activities. Once again, the river could talk. It would tell of two favorite places where people gathered to enjoy what winter had to offer. Located where Grandview Municipal Golf Course is today was once a 90-plus acre farm owned by Jacob Beechler. The farm had been in his family since 1870s, and the rolling hills that cascaded to the river's edge provided the best sledding anywhere when the snow fell. Here again is a map of that area. White River. Here's the old 8th Street Conservation Club pond and the farm that was owned by Jacob Beechler. Today, it's Grandview Golf Course. And if you go out there, what great sledding hills those would have been. Tremendous. I walked up to the top of the hill and took this photograph just to show you the thrill that would have been sledding down that hill, and the only thing between you and eternity was that river. For those who lived north of the river, access was easy. For those living south of the river, it was a different story. The only bridge crossing was downstream at Moss Island, followed by a long walk to the hills. The other option was to cross the river the old-fashioned way, using the Whittinger Ford to provide a direct access to the Beechler Hills. That is the original Moss Island Bridge, erected in 1870, and you had to walk clear out there to be able to get across the river and not get your feet wet. Here would be the bridge. Here's the Whittinger Ford, and here's the hill. So if you're coming from the south side, you've got two options. You either cross the ford here, or you walk all the way out here, cross the river, and come back. That was your two options. That is the Whittinger Ford right beside the Veterans Bridge on Rabel Avenue today. The reverse was true for the many who enjoyed ice skating. Immediately across the river from the Beechler Hills was a pond dug by the property owner, William R. Morris, who maintained it for raising fish, and in the winter, ice was cut and stored in the ice house, covered with sawdust, and then used during the summer. Morris sold the property to Charles S. Hughes, a rising name in the local meat retailing business. You all remember Hughes Curry, do you not? Well, this was Mr. Morris's pond. In 1900, Hughes built a frame slaughterhouse on the site and utilized the pond during the winter months by cutting and storing ice for meat preservation in his operations throughout the year. In 1908, Hughes moved his operations to a new facility, and eventually a group calling themselves the Conservation Club acquired the property. For well over 50 years, the Conservation Club pond was the scene of ice skating, pickup hockey games, and popular date night skating by couples beneath the lights who warmed themselves beside the numerous bonfires around the pond. That's the pond in the summertime. But that's the pond in the wintertime, and that's what I remember. I skated down there a lot. I didn't live very far away. And there were light standards around the pond, and it was lit at night. And another thing I remember was along the bank here, we'd build bonfires. And they'd roast hot dogs and weenies and whatever, s'mores, and you'd go out ice skating. That was the worst ice in the world to skate on because it was so rough, very rough. It was the roughest ice I ever was on. And the way we played hockey, we took a beer can or a Coke can, and we'd break a limb off of a tree, and that was our hockey stick. And we'd set two rocks, one on this side and one on the other, and you had to shoot the beer can between the rocks, and that's how we played hockey.
Did anybody ever fall through the pond?
Yes, I did. Yes. That pond, in all except at the very north end of the pond, the deepest part of the pond at the north end was, and perhaps still is only 3 feet. And this area out in here is no more than 2 feet. But it was enough to fill your skate when you went through. Well, we weren't real smart about it. We tried to skate on it when really you shouldn't be skating on it. But we knew if we fell through, what's going to happen? I go by there almost every day now, and I look at that, and I have a lot of memories of that place.
Is it still that shallow?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably even more so, Kenny, because all of the fill that's in there. But I'm talking in the 1950s, it was that shallow. That's a picture that I can reminisce with. It was great growing up on the West End. Great. Last but not least was the 1961 construction of Derby Downs, east of Madison Avenue. If the river could talk, it would tell of the massive effort by the city to create a beautiful soapbox derby racing venue, a Little League baseball park, and the removal of unsightly trash and debris in the river to enhance the attractiveness of the new Riverside Park in preparation for that first race that summer. And this is an aerial shot of it. And right here is the Madison Avenue Little League and the outfield. The grass in that outfield was laid by yours truly and the people I worked with at the Anderson Park Department. We took truckload after truckload of sod we cut from Mounds Park and laid it in the outfield. And when we got that done, they told us you got to clean the river up. And so every day, Monday through Friday, we'd enter the river about 8 in the morning, and we cleaned all of the debris. And I'm telling you what, there was a lot of debris in that river because it had never been cleaned before. It would also tell of the joy and heartache of many a young boy and girl who competed there over the years with the dream of advancing to the World Championships in Akron, Ohio. That's our track. There's Terry Townsend. Terry was my age. at Akron, national champion. You see who sponsored him, Terry?
Yep.
That's his brother, Barney. This is Derek Etherington, the 2000 Superstock World Champion from Anderson. And that would be the Akron track, Bill, in the background. Here's maybe a little better picture of it. This is Cody Butler from Anderson, the 2000 Masters World Champion. You know, back in my day, you had one champion, one race, and now they have lots of different divisions. So I guess that's a good thing. In 1994, the hill at Derby Downs was dedicated as Townsend Hill to recognize the contribution of the Townsend family to the Soapbox Derby. This is a photograph of Brooks Townsend, the oldest of the three boys. Emily?
Has the river ever been completely frozen over?
Yes.
I'll answer it for you this way. The Moravian missionaries who were here from 1801 to 1806. Reverend Kluge was the author of the diary that was kept. And he records on November the 1st, 1801, the river in front of the Moravian missionary was completely frozen over. Now you think about what weather like around here on November 1st. I mean, we're still in shirt sleeves, aren't we? Raking leaves or whatever. Yes, if the river could talk, it would have much to say about how people through the years have enjoyed themselves by taking advantage of the many recreations the river and all its adjacent sites has had and still has to offer. And just some photographs that I took of this place that I love. And I'm so happy that I was able to put it to pen, my love for the river. I played around it all my childhood. This is Scatterfield Road Bridge. This is the trail out there. It's just a beautiful place and deserving to be preserved.